This coward, Peter, that we know denied Jesus 3 times, is a very different person who we hear in the Acts of the Apostles. In a sense, he had been transformed by the risen Lord. And he speaks of the prophets in the Hebrew scriptures in such a way that a preacher should do, that those words were relevant right now in the Acts of the Apostles and what the people were facing in human history. This is the kernel of our faith, that the risen life is to touch our world now, our journey now. It's why Reinhold Niebuhr said, if you're going to hold the paper in one hand and the scriptures in the other, they must intersect. Or today, the paper, the newspaper, and Twitter. But how does the eternal reality affect this reality is what risen life is all about. John Updike, in his poem on resurrection on Easter, puts it this way: make no mistake, if he rose at all, it was at his body, as his body. If the cell's dissolution did not reverse, the molecule reknit, the amino acids rekindle, the church will fall. He goes on to say that if it's just a story of early ages, it means nothing. We have to walk through the door of resurrection. And so I think the Emmaus story and the disciples gathered today is a story for the contemporary person. These two walking on the journey known as Emmaus were in despair. And yet the risen Lord reached out to them. And it said that somehow in that process, the words of new life burned in their hearts. Or as they were gathered in the upper room in fear, that risen life came and offered them peace. In the same crisis we face today, they faced the first Easter. What I like to call the Emmaus crisis and the upper room crisis. And if you listen in our world, you can hear it. The Emmaus crisis is this: no matter what we do, hope is lost. It's not going to get any better. That's the Emmaus crisis. The upper room crisis looks at the world and locks in on itself in fear to escape it. And yet that is exactly where the risen Jesus accompanies them on the journey. You see, what happened on the cross was a beginning, the death. But the resurrection is the completion. There's a reason why he still had the wounds. It was that the Lord wanted to fully enter into the wounds of our humanity. The broken parts of our lives that we would like to erase and scribble out, and we give the world a poor witness because when we do that, because that's exactly where the risen Lord reaches us. And then we can look at that at a global area and the difficulties in our country or Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East, that the risen Lord came to enter into the wounds of human history. And ultimately, it does have to do with an encounter. It's why one prophet, Karl Rahner, who wrote much, said that either the believer will have an encounter, we could say with the risen Lord, or will cease to be anything at all. The church will fail because it is about an encounter with new life. And in our discouragement and in our despair, it's why each Easter season we have people pass through that font, as we said in the prayers, that they might be renewed in the youthfulness of the risen Lord. And by their renewal, we will be renewed. And those that were, some of them, I sat in front of that font with them last Sunday. And they could all walk through it, after walking through it, share an experience of risen life. The two things they told me was, it was like I came out and I was moving on a new plane. It's what the scriptures say about the resurrection, that we're called to be taken up in risen life. Or we could use the journey of Emmaus as their journey, even with the struggles and hurts, they were seeing through a new reality. And then, of course, the other image was, I felt like a new birth had taken place. And their experience is supposed to renew ours. They passed through the door of baptism to remind us that we need to walk through that door of risen life. And so today, do we have that encounter with the risen Lord? And how does that transform us? Howard Thurman, who we know did so much for justice and civil rights, puts it this way. His grandmother was a former slave. And he said about his grandmother, I learned more about the genius of the religion of Jesus from her than from all men who taught me Greek. Because she moved inside the experience and lived out of that kind of center. In a sense, our newest members become theologians. Peter was a fisherman, but because he moved out of that center, he was able to move within the world and in his faith in a different way. And so in the story, we need to see ourselves as these people in the upper room, that Jesus touches our wounds with peace. We need to see ourselves as whoever these two companions were on the road to Emmaus, that their journey had changed. They walked on a different plane after that encounter with the risen Lord. John Shea has a beautiful poem to help us enter into that image of Emmaus in Jerusalem and to be transformed by risen life. He says, on the road that escapes Jerusalem and winds along the ridge to Emmaus, two disillusioned youth dragged home their crucified dream. They had smelled Messiah in the air and rose to that scarred and ancient hope, only to mourn what might have been. And now, a sudden stranger falls upon their loss with excited words about surprises hidden at the heart of death. Do you not understand what died upon the cross was fear? They protested their right to despair. But he said, my Father's laughter fills the silence of the tomb. Because they did not understand, they offered him food. And in the breaking of the bread, they knew the impostor for who he was, the arsonist of the heart. We need to pass through the door. We need to operate at a new center. We need, in the breaking of the bread, to allow it to break through, to encounter the risen Lord, the arsonist of the heart.